right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. We have an incredible opportunity today. We've got a conversation with Ginny from Hazadapt out of Oregon, the United States of America. It is an incredible advancement in preparedness technology. You need to listen to this episode. You need to listen to what they're up to and what the future holds. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, Ginny, Katz, thanks for joining us here at Inside My Canoe. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. It is so good to be here and talk to you about what we're seeing at the cutting edge of community resilience technology.
And that technology is incredible. So why don't we start off? Tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about how you came to this world of community resilience.
Absolutely. So my background, and hi, I'm Ginny Katz. My background is all in disaster resilience. I'm a disaster resilience researcher with a specialization in communication technology. And, I first started off really in medicine, and that's where a lot of people start their, want to try to serve others is in medicine. But then I kept asking, well, how do we help more people? So then that led me to public health, and I got my, bachelor's in public health and epidemiology at University of Texas at San Antonio. And then I kept asking that question. Well, how do we keep helping more? And that is when I went into my master's of public health and global health at Oregon State University, and coming from diseases and then kind of expanding more into other hazards. So that's everything from, the natural hazards, so climate change driven events, or human-made hazards, everything from active shooters to human trafficking in the dark web, right? I wanted to understand, one, what drives these hazards, and then two, how do we adapt to them? What are the systems in place to respond to them? So that was a really fascinating, background, and that's where my heart is really helping people adapt to these hazards. But I fell in love with the technology that we use to communicate between the government and the public, right? So that's like alerts and GIS, and there was so much potential for creativity. So besides my fascination with disasters, I'm also an illustrator, an artist, and I love creating digital media. And so there was this whole opportunity to say, well, wait, we can expand how we are reaching the public. And so that's what kind of got me started in this idea of, well, how do we incorporate more tech and communications into public outreach? And I learned about this whole realm called emergency management. And one of the things that emergency managers do, especially on the local level, is they reach out and they do outreach to the public to prepare the public. And so that's where I was, 2017, in my global health program, studying disasters and hazards and tech, and doing outreach to the local community, and realizing, man, we don't really have any tools to help people help themselves, right? We have these PowerPoint presentations, maybe 20, 30 people come and drink the, lemonade and cookies we have in the back of whatever community center we're in. But we really have no idea if that presentation really helped people, but it was great for relationship building. And so this whole, moment of, well, how are we going to reach everybody else? I asked my, my boss at the time, was like, so what's the plan? How are we reaching the rest of the community? And she goes, well, actually, that's kind of it. That's all the resources we have.
Yeah.
That blew my mind. Wait, what about all the other languages? What about people with disabilities? What about, people that weren't able to make it today? And there was that's the best that we can do. And that kept me up for nights because every disaster, there are people that get harmed because they don't know what to do, or they just don't have the information they need. And so that really, set me on this path of discovering, well, how do we help people help themselves? And that's what led me to starting Hazadapt.
And that's it's hilarious because it's funny how you and I met not too long ago online through LinkedIn, and I've spent the last decade working on a subject that I've called public sector resident facing preparedness communications. So
Yeah.
I wrote my PhD dissertation on it. I've written thousands of published pages and articles and ideas about communicating to the public. And so you and I could probably spend 6 or 8 hours just talking about preparedness communications. and the whole series. And I think there's really important things we'll touch on today. But you've got this product called Hazadapt, and I really want to give you an opportunity to tell everybody about it, where they can find it, and then we're going to go into I really think a couple of things about how do we define preparedness, and then kind of take it from there. But tell us about Hazadapt.
Absolutely. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So Hazadapt is your hazard helper in your hand. It's a safety app. And people use it to find trustworthy official information on what to do to prepare, to respond, and to recover from all sorts of natural and human-made hazards. So you open the Hazard app, you can find it on the App Store. In the US, in Canada, it is available online at app.hazadapt.com. It's 100% free. And you open Hazard app, choose a hazard, and immediately you're given instructions on what to do to prepare, respond, and recover, as well as other resources to help you do those things. And that's everything from tools to contacts to tips from other experts in those realms. So it really is something that can help you on a personal level, but then also help those around you. And Hazadapt is really, really phenomenal because it was designed for this reason. You know, we as humans, we're really good at adapting at whatever tools are available, right? So we use Facebook and we use other social media platforms in a disaster, but they weren't created for that. They weren't created for that type of, public to public communication or public to governance communication. And so both the public and the government, are left kind of wondering, well, we sent the message, we hope someone got it, but we don't really know if it helped anybody. So that's what Hazadapt is doing now is we're supporting people from bottom up, helping them get prepared, but then also helping support local authorities get their emergency and safety information to that local area and helping people find it more conveniently. And besides just the hazard guide, which has like almost 50 hazard guides of different natural and man-made hazards, we also offer preparedness tools called prep checks. And these are really, really fun little gamified questions. On every hazard, you'll see a prep check that asks you, do you know what to do? And you'll place all the actions in order. Do you have the tools you need? Select all that you've got. So you start creating an inventory of all your emergency supplies. And then the third question, who do you feel most comfortable calling in this emergency? And so you kind of get to scope out, well, who would I actually call in an earthquake? Who would I actually call if an assault happened, right? And you start to think about your own personal support network and whether you would include 911 or you wouldn't. And so from that prep check, we can see, hey, you know what? You have this kind of coping capacity. Maybe you have a strong coping capacity. Maybe you have a coping capacity that could be improved and it's just starting. And our goal is to help give you the tools to help you strengthen your ability to cope with all of these different hazards that come your way. So from preparedness to, surviving all the way to recovery, Hazadapt offers all of those resources on your phone and even offline. So if there's no internet, once you've downloaded Hazadapt, it's all there for you, ready to go.
And I think and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that one of the challenges that's always been, and I have this with my students when I teach in the graduate education, and I say to them, I said, okay, if you were to define a prepared individual, because we can't, what I posit and what I argue in my writings is we can't define what a preparedness level is unless we can define what a prepared individual is. If we can't tell people you need to be this over here, whatever that avatar is, in order to be prepared. And so we need to be able to identify it because you can't measure preparedness unless you know exactly what it is you're measuring. And traditionally, what we've done here in Canada, and I know in the United States, is we ask a bunch of questions that aren't correlated to preparedness at all. And we call it FEMA training, by the way, is fabulous for this. They ask whether people have flashlights, perishable food, water. And there has never been a person in North America who has been saved from a disaster by the possession of a flashlight. But here we are. That's one of the key questions that's being asked. So I pose this to my students. I say simply, if I was to put an avatar at the front of the room and they were a prepared individual, how would you describe them? How would you be able to tell me when when somebody is prepared. And most of the discussion is around some form of combination between skills, knowledge, and relationships.
Mhm.
There are some people that believe possessions and kit and equipment in your basement equate to preparedness. That's a debate I love to have with individuals. I don't think so, but that's neither here nor there. It's just being able to positively communicate. And that's one thing that I think is missing in the public sector resident facing preparedness communications is we don't, when I say we, I mean the government does not tell people this is what you need to be able to do. Because as a good friend of mine who works in the healthcare system, emergency management here in Canada framed it, the current government communications create professional victims. People
Ooh.
who, because if you have a plan, have a kit, and be informed, you create a professional victim, somebody who will be hurt by the calamity and will survive, but they're still a victim. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we go about defining in reasonably accurate terms what a prepared individual is.
Ooh. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, I second that thought of, people feeling like, I did what was told and I'm still impacted. I'm still not in a place where I thought I would be. And the expectation of what will happen to you throughout the entire disaster cycle, um, is not really something communicated. And or people have a hard time even like going through that mental gymnasium of, well, if power goes out, this is going to impact A, B, C, D. If my house is flooded, here's where, I'm going to be going, right? Thinking through those smaller steps rather than have your go bag. And that really does stem from I want to say convenience, but more so just the limited capacity of authorities to create and cultivate tons and tons of information and preparedness information that is receivable by the public and actionable by the public in their conducive time. So these are really small teams, and they're just trying to think, what is the message I can get out that'll help the most amount of people?
Yeah.
And that one size fits all, just like you were saying, it's not working. It's not. Well, I should say it works for some people, a lot of people, in small ways, but it's incomplete, and it doesn't really address many of the intersections that need to be addressed that are impacted differently in disasters. So, when you're asking me what defines a prepared individual, you know, I agree that it is really, one, knowledge of what are my risks, right? Where do I live? What are the hazards around me? And if those hazards come into my life, I, one, know what to do. If I do need those tools and resources, and, people think of, a go bag, that's like the, trending slash most promoted emergency item, or flashlights. But your cell phone, your car, your honestly, the food that you have, those are and water. Oh my gosh, your ability to create water and or find clean water, those are going to be absolutely essential items if you're on your own. And so that ability to, still maintain safety within a grid failure, or if you are on your own, that would, I think personally for me, that would probably be one of the main indicators of, this is a prepared individual. But that's going to look different from everybody. Some people can be totally electricity free and thrive.
Yeah.
Many people, though, that's not possible for them. And so me saying, a prepared individual has a generator, maybe they don't need one, but many people do. So it really is understanding your needs and how your needs are going to be impacted by whatever hazard or infrastructure failure crosses your path.
And I love the way you phrase that is it's going to look different from everybody because I argue that, you argue that. And this is why I'm a big fan of your Hazadapt and the idea that it's available as well, in case everybody understands, it's available offline. So once I get it on my phone, I lose access to the cell network. I still have access to all the hazards and all the prep checks because exactly that. I need access to a certain period of information. Sorry, I need access to information that I'll need in a timely sense. And again, I love your idea of technology because I can bring a lot of books, right? But
Yeah.
what's the one device that nobody goes anywhere without? Everybody carries their cell phone. And if the information that I need is on my cell phone, that I don't need something else other than what I normally carry. I mean, there's a famous thing online for gentlemen called the EDC, the everyday carry. What do you
Mm.
carry every day? And I don't mean the Second Amendment tools. I mean regular stuff like flashlight, car keys, wallet. Like, what do you normally carry with you as you move around? And the cell phone is one of those items. So again, your organization, you using the cell phone as a tool that is already present in everybody's hand, and then leveraging that technology, I think is absolutely brilliant, because I've always said that it's technology driven in the modern sense of what the preparedness communication comes out of the government right now is, here in Canada, we have Preparedness Week, the first week of May. For America, it's the entire month of May. It's called the Preparedness Month. Everybody jumps on their soapbox. They say the same things. And exactly like what you said earlier, I think is a very important point to amplify is, we don't know if anybody's listening. We have no methodology to know. First of all, if we can define that prepared person and we measure it and we see that 13% of our population is considered prepared. Okay, great. Now we can design a communications program to move that. We launch it during Preparedness Month. 1st of June, we conduct a series of measurements to compare them to the pre to see if we have a new adoptive behaviors within the population. That would be a logical program and strategy. The problem, like you said, is most teams are one person off the corner of their desk, is that we don't do that. We don't actually measure. So we get up, we profess what we think is valuable and helpful. Again, like you said, traditionally what we know,
Mhm.
or what we've habitually been put out, as I call it, the paradigmatic information set for emergency management. And there you are. We have people saying things and then they go home and they hand out awards for great communication programs. And there's never a knowledge as to whether the population is more prepared or not. And very interested in, does your tool now or in the future, do you intend to include some type of survey mechanism to test and this does get into the idea of privacy issues, right? Which is always present in online activity. And I'm sure you have great privacy protocols, but do you have any plans to add some type of survey instrument to draw that information from the public who are already on your app?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in that traditional method of surveying, right, that is a tried and true method of, asking the public about a certain topic and getting that information back. And one of the tricks, and challenges with that is that we don't really get as much participation as we would always hope. And it's usually focused on one thing. And what we wanted to do is find a way to support more consistent back and forth of information exchange without causing a huge burden on either side, right? So for the public, constantly getting barraged with, well, how did this go? How's the survey? Versus, like prep checks, that's a regular,
Yeah.
consistent kind of survey style question. And even further, us asking about, post event stuff. Absolutely. We'd love to do that in the future. But for right now, how we really focus on understanding, the public activity and engagement on Hazadapt is we look at what hazards are people looking at, what hazard guides, what information within the guide are they looking at, and what language are they accessing, and what type of inclusivity, boosters are they putting in. And that's something I didn't mention earlier that is kind of key for Hazadapt's hazard guide is you can customize the guide as you need at the time you need. So you come on into, for instance, extreme heat, and you'll notice that there are boosters for elderly, children, animals, including pets, wildlife, and farm animals. And you'll see that there's, a way to actually pull more inclusive information up. So we want to see and understand how people interact with this information, and then we're able to kind of showcase these analytics and not personal identifiable
Yeah.
information,
Yeah.
but analytics to authorities and saying, hey, in your jurisdiction, we see that not only is, for instance, earthquake or extreme heat, really trending. We're seeing that when people do these prep checks, a percentage of them, one, do not have the supplies they need. Another percent of them has no idea how to handle this, or they're scoring really low. And or a percentage of them would not feel comfortable calling 911 if they were in an emergency in extreme heat. And it doesn't matter if you've got the best emergency response system in the world, the most funded, if the people do not trust calling it, it's not going to work. And so for us, we currently offer an opportunity for authorities to have their local safety information on Hazadapt. And anytime anybody walks into that jurisdiction, their Hazadapt automatically updates with that local info. And for authorities, whenever anybody accesses that information, they get an idea that says, oh, hey, how many people today access that information? And that's really, really helpful because we can see as emergency authorities, when we do outreach, what was the long-term impact? And I have this really exciting example that just happened last week. You're familiar with the Great Shakeout, right? The big
Yeah,
earthquake.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and this is one of the most concerted multi-agency outreach moments in all of emergency management across the world, right? Millions of people participate in the Great Shakeout. But we throw tons of money towards media and stuff. We don't really know if it's actually doing anything for people's earthquake preparedness. And coming from the university realm, right, we would get the Great Shakeout alerts. And of course, I'm like crawling under my desk and whatnot. And people are like, oh yeah, that's right. I saw that alert. I didn't do it. I guess I'd be dead. It's like, oh wait, hold on. How is this helpful? Is all of that money that we're throwing into this media actually working for us in the way that we want? In the marketing realm, if we were just throwing out marketing and not seeing any kind of return of investment, we wouldn't be doing that marketing and strategy anymore. We'd find something else. And so it's one of those moments where we have to have better one analytics and understanding, and then that transfer of back and forth information between the public and authority. And that's what we're doing without having to necessarily make it, survey based, individually based, and or sharing your personal safety information.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, personal information is very important to protect, obviously. And I love the idea the analytics are flowing back and forth and that you're not putting a paywall or you're not putting in any type of block up between you and the authorities getting access to that. And I love the idea, the variable location, I think is incredible. The fact that as I move around, Hazadapt will tell me that, oh, you're in this new area. And according to the locals, authorities, they've added this set of hazards that you should be aware of while you're in our general region. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
And earthquakes are real. I remember my last earthquake I went through was 2009, a few years ago, but I almost got thrown out of my cubicle at work because the building was shaking so bad. And I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. It is on a very small, not very public fault line. It's not something that happens very often here. And we have very little earthquake precautions or earthquake information that's shared with the public, but it's a pretty significant hazard we sit on. And a lot of it would be interesting to see your percentage of the population over time that downloads your app and uses your app. So do you see a trending up? I'm assuming you do see a trending up, but is there any specific regions of the US where you see a greater increase in adoption of Hazadapt?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized I got really passionate about the Great Shakeout, and I didn't share that cool example.
Oh,
So with
well,
the Great
there you
Shakeout,
go.
yeah, we had an emergency authority actually share two alerts regarding the Great Shakeout. One at 7 a.m. was a bit accidental, but then again, one at 10:17, which is the time of the Great Shakeout. And what we saw at both the times that the alert was sent out with the Hazadapt earthquake link, like 60 plus people went to that link and actually looked at the hazard guide
Yep.
and actually gave themselves more of an opportunity to learn about earthquake preparedness, response, and recovery. That's amazing. Those, extra steps besides just getting the email and saying, oh, yeah, you know, those
Yep.
extra steps are protective actions, and we want to see that in the public.
Yep.
So we were able to actually go to that emergency authority and say, hey, when you sent that link, we saw people go to it. That impacted people. They took action. And that we kept calling it empowered convenience. When we see emergency authorities add a Hazadapt link to their alert, not only are people empowered with more information, we see people take up to 10 times the protective action steps and activities within the hour. after that alert. And that's what we want to see as emergency authorities. We want to see people take real immediate action towards their own safety based on our alerts. And so this last couple weeks, right, we have actually been very closely watching Hazadapt activity because we have been spiking significantly. So September was a massive month of growth for us. We, I think had almost additional 1,000 downloads of the app. And it was interesting because we saw a ton of activity happening during the Helene and Milton hurricanes. And all in that same corridor. So, right, so Florida, North Carolina, it's Georgia, right, Alabama. We were seeing a lot of entities really start to get onto Hazadapt and look at the different guides. And hurricane was trending, but even more trending was dirty drinking water. And that's been one of the most significantly accessed hazards throughout that entire region. But what we've continued to see throughout this entire space since we just recently launched this in September, civil unrest has actually been one of our most trending, if not the trending guide, leading up to the elections. And we're seeing that across the nation, but especially in states that have a history of civil unrest and protests. So New York, Oregon, California, right? But that, we kind of expect that because we know elections are coming up, and we are also doing outreach regarding civil unrest, and so are other entities. Kind of an interesting spike of activity was on Threads. We're very active on Threads. An Oregonian had moved away, was mentioning, I am really scared for all my friends in Oregon because we keep seeing all of these additional little mini quakes happening here on the West Coast. And I have a feeling the big one's going to happen, right? So this is all personal anecdote. This is not an official message. This is just a member of the public expressing fear.
Yeah.
And so, as Hazadapt, I went up there and I said, hey, you're right. We are in earthquake country. It's always a good idea to be earthquake prepared. Here's the earthquake guide. That day, we had 500 people jump to Hazadapt and actually look at the earthquake guide and start actually taking preparedness actions and doing prep checks. That's incredible. That's what we want to see. We want to see people encouraging each other to go and take that action. And we know if you have that empowered convenience, you're more likely to actually take that action.
And it's so true. And I could say 100 times, I'm a huge fan of the technology. One of the barriers that does happen and is realistic in preparedness, and I love the idea of preparedness because I advocate the same thing you do, that it's far more than natural hazards and worrying about hurricanes. It's a plethora of events. You have choking, car accident, burns, building collapses, blood contact safety, and a number of other hazards people have that are on there. And preparedness is really being ready for exogenous shocks that are beyond your control, that can be political, cultural, economic, familial, however they cost. One of the barriers that we see in the research is apathy and avoidance. And a lot of that, from my viewpoint, comes from an overwhelming amount of information or an overwhelming level of threat. Every time the government tries to use fear, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work in any persuading people to do something out of fear. It's like the Tampa mayor who said, if you stay in your home, you'll die. And the problem is they didn't die. And because people didn't die in their homes, every time in the future that the Tampa mayor gives a warning, she's going to be discredited and ignored. Unfortunately, that was a choice she made, and that's the problem. One of the things that I see, and I'm just really interested in how you folks have addressed this at Hazadapt, is having 40 or 50 preparedness plans and ideas in somebody's inbox has always been seen or viewed as a reason why people avoid it. There's just too much to get ready for. So I'm just going to turn left and ignore the entire process itself. How do you overcome the danger of overwhelming your target population?
Ooh, that is one of the $1 million questions. And we see this honestly also with the all hazards preparedness approach,
Yeah.
right? People first and foremost will say, well, what's a hazard? And then they'll say, and how many are there? And you're like, well, let me get the list. Right? It's a lot. It is so much. And I think that attitude of, well, how do we combat this? How do we overcome this? That's a very militarized approach in a way that that's very traditional to emergency management and to how we, want to fix things. We want to conquer it. We want to approach it that way. At Hazardap, we rather than trying to say let's combat it, it's where how do we meet people where they're at?
Yeah.
We know people are not ready. We know that people turn to Google. We know that people are just in time preparedness mostly, and or they're going to rely on their insurance. They're going to rely on, well, the government will come, FEMA will come. And so we recognize that majority of people are actually going to be in the moment unprepared and needing help. So let's just address it as it is and let's support them where they're at. And in that sense of, people may not always be aware of every single hazard that's in Hazadapt, and that's okay. But they have an idea that there's a lot of hazard guides in Hazadapt, and I can go there for trusted information. That bit of reassurance buries deep in people, and I hear it all the time from our users. I just have so much more anxiety relief knowing that even if I come against a hazard I'm not familiar with, I've got Hazadapt. And that I think is one of the biggest barrier breakers is just people feeling like, oh, okay, I can do this a little bit rather than that overwhelming feeling of, whoa. And we see that not just in the psychology of all hazards or, trying to get people to prepare for everything at once. We also see that in the way information is presented. So, and I look at a lot of emergency management websites from local level to federal level, county, state, everything in between. And I've seen some amazing ones and I've seen some horrific ones. And I'm not going to call out names, but I'm going to say there's a spectrum. Majority of safety information that we see is one wall of text style because we're trying to educate the public. Well, let me tell you about why earthquakes happen. Let me tell you about all the different things that can happen. It's very, very dense, and it's usually at a level of graduate level readings level. It's not necessarily easily understandable for the general public, which here in the States, that's there. Most people's reading level is around eighth grade or lower, right? We have seen improvements of literacy, but there's always still going to be people that really struggle with literacy. So we need to understand that if people get overwhelmed just from that first blush of that wall of text, they're done. They're not going to, it's too much. And if we can identify where those little overwhelm moments happen and say, okay, hey, I know that that's a big thing. Come here, let me show you an easy thing. Bullet points, easy to skim, right? That's how we really approach meeting people where they're at, identifying those triggers of overwhelm, and then offering an alternative.
And I love your inclusion of visual creatives because I taught a course last fall that used to be based around arts and creative and emergency management. It's been somewhat updated, but it's about saying, hey, how can we use art? How can we use creatives? How can we use the entertainment industry to assist in adopting the preparedness message in the community? And I actually wrote an article, a blog on my website about how powerful the entertainment industry actually is and its influence. And I just don't mean the, Swifties and groups such as that, but I mean, in general, people spend more time engaging with the entertainment industry than they probably actually consider when you look at Netflix and you look at everything else that people. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is I my handle, the thing that I use in my business is non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education for rational people, because I don't think the world's going to collapse. Nuclear Armageddon is not around the corner. And apology, but to the preppers building, bunkers in the woods, I'm sorry, you're probably not going to need those. But one of the key things that I try to say is evidence-based, because my looking at a lot of the preparedness communications that comes out of government now and some of the material coming out of academia is it's not evidence-based. They don't, what I mean by evidence-based, I should clarify that is when we examine communities that have experienced a hazard and we look at what variables contributed to them having better post-event outcomes, we then take those variables and use those in our communications. That would make it evidence-based. For example, the standard FEMA and Public Safety Canada message comes out of the civil defense era, out of the early 1950s, 1960s in nuclear warfare. And we don't generally base it on evidence. So I'm very cautious myself about taking what a government agency says and then amplifying it and say, hey, look, they say to do this. So this must be the logical thing for people to do. So how do you use evidence-based in deciding what information goes into your prep checks and that type of and your hazard profiles?
Yeah. So, when we really look at what is available out there, we have to first and foremost lean on the resources that we know and trust, and which often do come from academia. But we know that not all safety information, in fact, the most practical safety information comes from emergency authorities or responders who have been there, done that. And we really try to make sure that we're incorporating multiple resources that and verifying between different ones, both those that have been on the ground and then those that have a very theoretical sense. And because we know that there's value in both, but our main focus is one, how do we help people make the decisions and have the information they need to make the decision best for them? And providing the tools and resources that they need to enact or do those actions if we can. But that entire conundrum of, well, what's going to work for one person may not work for another person. That is a very real reality of adaptation. And as much as we can provide all of the different variables and information pieces that could result in perfect adaptation, for others, it may not be. And so, no matter what tools and information you're going to use, there's always going to be that percentage of, well, there might be other things you need to consider for yourself. So, Hazadapt always goes off of, validated official sources, and research. And we have hazard experts on the team. And every Sunday, we meet and we talk about whatever hazards on the plate, that we're working on. And we really think through the gentle public experience, or in tech, they call them users. We don't really love that term. But they're technology users and Hazadapt users. But we think through the gentle public experience, as first and foremost, in the general sense, how emergency management does it. But then we really layer on those different inclusivity needs and intersections. So if I'm a person with a disability, if I'm a person with kids, if I'm a person of color who has different oppressive systems I have to navigate, right? If I am an elder, if I have animals, like what is going to be my experience? What are my needs? And that takes a whole team of people empathetically thinking through those actions and considerations for every hazard. And we're always building that. It is never going to be a complete project, right? And we've kind of, signed ourselves up for this, goal of trying to incorporate all of this information for the rest of our lives. And that is just a reality of where we're at.
And that I think is living in the frame that has adapt like many other, not like many other, because there aren't many other systems, is a living, breathing organism that adapts and changes to the environment in which it is. And that way, framing it, you don't have an end state. You don't have, hey, listen, when we get just 3 more hazards, we've done it. Or when we make our prep checks 2 pages long, not one, we've reached the goal. We can high five each other. We're all done. It's a living, breathing thing that will change. And as new, pandemics really didn't matter to anybody in 2019. Nobody really cared. Now, I'm going to argue in 2 years, they're not going to care again, because we're going to be far enough away from the last one that people will now have separated from it and moved on to the next consideration. And so I think that's always so important. And looking at hazards, when we think about hazards, we think about, man-made and natural hazards, and it's traditional delineation, but there are so many other hazards. What is the one, and I'd be really interested to know, what is the one that you find the most challenging, or group or type of hazard that you find the most challenging to develop helpful information, to codify it?
By far, any type of social hazard. We're talking active shooters, sexual assault, hate crimes. Absolutely. And the reason why that is so hard is, like I mentioned earlier, that very empathetic moment we're all taking as a hazard team. What is that experience like? And there's something that is very real about with natural hazards, right? You can't blame a hurricane for being a hurricane, right? That's just, it's what it is. And you can be upset that agencies or entities have furthered climate change, but it's very, shakes fist at the air vibes, right? You can be angry at it, but you can't do much about it. Um, on the other hand, active shooters, that is someone who has intent. They wanted to harm. And there's that deeper feeling of, oh gosh, there's also just evil. Because you can't really call natural hazards evil, but the combating of evil and trying to understand the psychology of that hazard, right? Why would someone go and cause harm like this? What are their main MOs, and or what should people know in order to avoid being a target? And, we've launched quite a few. Sexual assault was also incredibly difficult for our team, right? We have survivors on our team, not just from sexual assault, from many different hazards. And that moment of understanding our experiences and or the experiences of others is very difficult. It is very, very difficult. And because of the amount of social factors that come into these hazards and the social impacts afterwards, the stigmas that happen, that is another major consideration that we don't have to necessarily consider as deeply with tornadoes, right? Um, so that tends to be the most difficult for our team, and they take the longest time to develop. And we want to do it one sense with sensitivity, right? Because we know that people coming to this, how they're going to be, feeling and traumatized, but then also preparing them and giving them the expectations of what they should be expecting. So one example that comes to mind is with hate crimes, right? We want to believe and we want to, promote that if you are experiencing a hate crime, you can call 911 and they're going to come and help, and they will come and help protect you. And what we've seen is that people who experience hate crimes, first and foremost, have had experiences previously, either or anecdotally, that have been harmful or have been hate crimes from authorities. And so there's that institutional distrust. And yet our app is going to be promoting that same institution to them. And we've had people say, I don't feel comfortable calling 911. What else do I do? And that was one of the main reasons from the beginning. We've always tried to include alternative resources, and finding those additional resources beyond just calling 911. That takes additional time too. Um, and we're happy to do it. We're happy to find those additional resources and those more culturally sensitive resources. So posts, when you're recovering from sexual assault, you want to be surrounded by your community. And so you'll notice that there's, cultural and community-based recovery resources in our sexual assault guide. So that is arguably the hardest one, and one that I've been working on and has not been published yet is actually genocide. And we've been working on that since the start of October 8th, and really seeing, different genocides happen all over the world. And that research really comes down to saying there, your personal coping capacity in a genocide, from all the studies that they've done, it doesn't matter, because the only way to really get out of a genocide is through rescue. But if the only rescue available would have been the government or others, and they're not doing anything, what else can you offer? And that's a huge one that, like, honestly, that keeps me up at night. And that's a huge burden on, or like a weight on my heart on how can we do more to help people help themselves. And there are certain hazards that we cannot offer enough or do much more than we already are to help them.
And the tough and difficult part to discuss in those areas, you're absolutely right. And a lot of times we'll see political consideration or political ideology on both sides. And there's a great book written by the Breaking Points staff on populism. And they basically, Breaking Points is a US based journalism outlet, and there's one Democrat and one Republican, and so they clearly state that populism is just as powerful on the left as it is on the right of the spectrum. Like, populism doesn't lie. And the difficulty, though, I find in the preparedness spectrum of political events is it gets very difficult when you're trying to send a preparedness message if you're going to take a political viewpoint. The challenge in the thing is that, for example, if I say climate change is causing more frequent disasters, I've now lost 40% of my target market because 40% of them don't agree with that statement. Irrespective of what I feel, they disagree. I'm now no longer an expert in the field and I'll be dismissed. Um, is the Israeli government correct for what they're doing or not? Doesn't matter what my opinion is. There's certain parts of the population that will tune me out if I take one political position or another. And so the challenge that I find in a preparedness messaging is, how do I become apolitical?
Mm.
How do I not open the can of worms, irrespective of my personal passions and belief about the preparedness messaging, and try to keep, and I don't want to say neutral because nobody's neutral. Every one of us have some bias of some type or another. But to be able to say, hey, listen, I've got preparedness messaging for you, but I'm intentionally steering away. Public violence exists. I'm not going to talk to you about why public violence happens. I'm going to talk to you about the things that you can consider to get ready for and how to navigate through a public violence situation. Now, whether, irrespective of what happens on the 5th of November, 40% of committed Americans are going to be angry. Now, the vast majority of them are just going to go, oh, well, I had my say. I don't get the final say. I'm going to get up and go to work tomorrow, right? I'm going to carry on. But a very small, on either end of the spectrum, whoever turns out to be angry on November 6th is going to present themselves. And like you said, it's going to be a different area of the country determining on how that goes. So I like that information. I've just always, or my just over a decade of experience has taught me that I need to stay away from political conflicts. Like, for example, I did a very good friend of mine and somebody I did my master's with. She runs a midwife humanitarian organization out of Germany. And she's gone into Ukraine because guess what? Babies are born in disasters and warfare. It's humanity. And so she was looking for pointers, et cetera. And I did a couple of podcast episodes on considerations in a war zone. Not whether I agree with whether Putin is right or Zelensky is right, whether America's right or whether Germany's right. There's a war on, and people are affected by the war. And here's what the considerations you can bring aboard to keep you and your team safe, but still be able to execute your mission on the ground, right? And I think politics is such a dangerous, polarizing sport in today's world. Here in Canada, we have a government that apparently the entire country hates and we can't wait. But our system is the government basically has to give up. We don't have a fixed election date. So here we are. But yeah, no, I just want to say that about politics is that I try to avoid those type of topics, that I just think them very difficult and challenging. And again, the difficulty is part of the people, part of your listeners who need your information, who want your information and will benefit, are somewhat going to turn the other way because of various political positions. Have you ever, and a question on that, that's not just that rant, but the question on it is, have you ever seen or experienced pushback because of somewhat, not yours, but someone's perceived political viewpoint that you have?
No, and I'm really thankful that we there's so much to unpack here. So we haven't gotten pushback, but we do a lot of work on the front end to understand what are the trigger points around this disaster, whether that's personal trauma, political incendiaries, and or trends of how people act in those hazards. And one of them, for example, is abortion and pregnancy and birth, right? Highly politicized hazard. And that is something that I think we kind of come to this bottom line of the standard of is hazards are technically apolitical, but we people make them political. And that idea that, we as at Hazadapt, we don't promote hurricanes any more than we promote abortion. They're both hazards, and whether your, area, so for instance, Texas, it bans abortion, they're still going to happen. And what do we need to know to stay safe if people have, botched abortions, and or what do we need to know if you are seeking one, rather like presenting information on how to find one and what are the laws in your area, rather than us just saying, well, if abortion's not allowed here, we're just not going to have that information. No, no, absolutely not. We don't promote it, but we want people to stay safe if they encounter it. And that's the part where, when an ambulance, and responders go to a scene, if there's someone hurting there that's wearing a MAGA t-shirt or wearing, a very far left t-shirt, they don't care. They're still going to provide response. And then at least that's what they should be doing, right?
Well, let's hope
Why is
that's
this?
what they do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they should be doing. We shouldn't be caring about what the political beliefs are, because life has sanctity and we want to preserve life. That's what we've committed to do. So, if people do ever have pushback, of course, we invite conversation. We want to hear, what are your concerns? Are there things that we can improve? And that's across the spectrum, right? We are always here to improve. But what we're not going to do is compromise scientifically based facts. We're not going to compromise facts that we know to be true, and or hide information because it makes somebody politically uncomfortable. That's not what we are. We are not a political app. We're a safety app. And it doesn't matter what side you're on, doesn't matter what you believe. You need to know what to do with this hazard, which is technically apolitical, and you're wrapping your own political beliefs around it.
And I so agree. And staying apolitical is so important in today's contested environment, and staying out of, politics extends to look at different governors' impression of FEMA's response to hurricanes. Certain governors are critical, certain governors are not critical, are very supportive. And I don't know American politics well enough to know whether it's the Democrat governors that support and it's all about election. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm not aware of that. I know here that when our provincial, the equivalent of the state governments, call on the national government for assistance in a disaster, it is not politicized. We rarely see anybody try to raise their head. Well, we asked for help and it didn't come, or it didn't come in the way that we wanted, because I think I can get myself a political score here. So at least there's a limit on that type of accusatory levels within the subnational and the national government when it comes to providing assistance there. And it's unfortunate. And I wrote a piece on the fact of the distrust in institution. And I think you mentioned earlier, and I think it's an important point, that irrespective of how you think, and your public health background, being very knowledgeable on how the government communicated in the pandemic. And we have and studies in the science, like you said, and I love the way you said based on scientific evidence, because I wish more people would actually based on evidence and not feelings and beliefs. We'd be a lot better off. But the evidence shows we have a fall in institutional trust. And at best, we have a plurality of the population who supports our governing institutions. So when they stand up to a microphone in times of an emergency and say something, there's at least about 50% of the population that's going to ask themselves, well, what's their motive? What's their intent behind this announcement? What are they not telling me about something? And the greatest thing that scares me, having worked in a hospital for a couple of years, is this pandemic. We got away with an easy one here. This was a great test run to tell us a whole bunch of information. The next one that has a far more contagious, far more serious health implication, a plurality of the population is going to ignore the government, and they're going to ignore public health when it comes to telling them what to do. And I don't actively see governments trying to repair that institutional trust. And not going off topic, because it's huge in preparedness, because if you're going to communicate a preparedness message, you're doing so from a position of a government institutional agency. You and I may look at agencies differently, but John and Jane Q. Public look at the government as one big swath, whether you're speaking from FEMA, the IRS, ICE, DEA, whatever it may be, the FBI, they're all the government. And the difficulty in institutional trust is challenging, which where I'm going with this, it makes sense in a second, is that that's where I think you come in. That's where I think a non-governmental, not-for-profit organizational system like Hazadapt that comes to the public and says, here is evidence-based scientific information. We are not a government agency. This app is free and the information is free. And we're here to provide it to you. I think the potential for your organization is literally unlimited in being seen as that independent, intelligent, evidence-based resource. I'm just wondering how big you think you can get internationally.
Oh, so and that is the big vision is to be a global resource, but truly, and we know that every country has a different emergency response system. There may be a lot of similarities, and we may share, like for instance, a lot of North America uses the 911 number as their like emergency number, but there are different agencies, there are different resources, and truly, this type of an app, this type of thing should be made by locals. It should be made by people who deeply understand the community, the culture. And so we absolutely see the future and vision of Hazadapt, Hazadapt Canada, Hazadapt Mexico, right? We and far beyond. We see that potential, and we know that that will take time because we want to do it right. We don't want to come in as Americans and say, "Well, let's work for us. Let's do it for everybody else," right?
We
That's
know
not
what's right.
right, right. And I want to, I will say, here's one space where you can see the America come through on us. You mentioned earlier, we're, non-for-profit, and that's not the trick case. We are a C corporation. We are a full-on business. And I am actually quite proud of this because I truly believe we need an example of a business that is ethical, doing right by the public, and can still create sustainable revenue and sustainable growth. We don't have to extort people like a lot of tech does to make great money, right? We should be able to have a profitable business doing the right thing. It's shocking, I know, but that's the startup in me that's like, no, I'm going to show them we can do this. You don't have to be a Facebook. But I want to come back to something that you've been talking about. And this kind of circles back to the media that is shown and like the Hollywood media, right? The depictions that people see in media of emergency response, of emergency management, right? It looks very NASA-esque, right? In these big control rooms and all the people scurrying about and the choppers flying out, right? Like that vision, I think contributes deeply to the distrust that people have because what our conceived perception is of emergency response, the power, the ability, is not what we really have on the local level. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this. How much do you think, we should be really trying to address these glamorizations of what emergency response is, and in the public through our media?
And I think we have it all wrong. And I absolutely agree with you. The lens is pointed outward when it needs to point inward. I've said and written at length about the fact that every time there's a disaster or an emergency, there are four responses. So we have four sectors of society: your government, your corporate, your not-for-profit, and your civil sector, the people. Everybody responds. All four sectors respond. And traditionally, the public sector has always believed they're in charge, but they're not in charge. They're one of the four responses. So when Oregon State Emergency Management launches into a situation, they only have authority over public sector resources. They can't tell businesses what to do. They can't tell private corporations what to do. They literally can't tell people what to do. They can't tell church groups and faith groups and not-for-profit and the Salvation Army. They don't have authority over everybody, but it's been the traditional militaristic idea of command and control that is blowing this out of proportion and getting people not to pay attention. Because the greatest assets we have in our society that is untapped at this point is the corporate sector. When we look, and I will say, and will absolutely support your idea that My company, Preparedness Labs Incorporated, is a for-profit corporation in Canada. We are doing great work and supporting people and learning about preparedness, but you can do that and still make a profit and pay each other's mortgage. It's kind of how the world has to work. Somebody has to pay the bills. And this year we paid corporate income taxes, so we gave back to our country and our state level government and contributed to that. But when you look at the town that you live in and the town that I live in, there is a very poor relationship between the public sector emergency management organizations and the chambers of commerce and the corporations that exist in the community. And the corporations are people who live in the community. Their employees all live in the community. I've seen far too many instances where we evacuate a town and then we bring in a bunch of heavy equipment to save it, when in fact all of the heavy equipment already existed in the town and all of the operators already existed in the town for a private company. But because they weren't connected, we evacuated all the families of the people who operate the equipment and then had to truck it in. And what I argue is your city where you live already has all the resources it needs to navigate through a disruption short of a total collapse like Asheville, North Carolina. So you got to set those anomalies aside. But your town that you live in already has everything it needs to navigate a disaster. It's just not all sitting around the same table. They don't talk to each other. When was the last time, and I call it a local preparedness council or local response council. You can come up with whatever name you want, but it's a place where we intentionally set to bring the public sector, the corporations, the not-for-profit, and the resident representatives around a table to talk about, like you do in your app. What does response look like for us? What are our concerns? How many local emergency management agencies build their response plans off of what the public would like them to do versus what they think the public needs? Those may be two distinctly different ideas. And one example I had in research I did in Ontario was the number one thing that the local agency said needed to be restored was the power. Obviously, they wanted the power back up, throwing all the resources after it. But when I pulled the population, it was actually transportation. They were a semi-rural community, and it was more important to them to have the roads cleared than the power back on, because they could get around and help their neighbors and do the connectedness that was powerful in their community. So here was a very well-intentioned, very well-meaning emergency management agency rushing out to do a task that was not the number one interest of the community. And that doesn't happen until we create intentional collaboration, until we intentional cooperation, until nobody's going to get around that table until somebody steps up. And this is a presentation that I gave at Canada's National Conference in September. I'm flying out to Banff, Alberta in the Rocky Mountains, reasonably close to your location.
My neck of the woods.
The first week of November, to give the very same presentation to a regional conference there about the power of a whole of community. Because one of the things that my for-profit corporation sells is a course that teaches communities how to do that. So who are the 40 people in your community and by position that are representative in each that need to be around that table? Who are they? How do you get them in there? What scripts do you use? And that type of thing. And I really think that's the big key, is that because, and I'll ask you a question 1 second. When you look at the economics, I know emergency management is not getting any more funding. And I base that upon the fact that it competes with the military, it competes with the border, it competes with childcare, healthcare, pharmacare, and all these other things sit around the cabinet table at every level of government, and emergency management loses. And they will continue to use because the population does not see it as a top level thing. So if I only have $50 and I would love to have 150, there are better ways to organize my 50. But that doesn't happen unless we're opening ourselves to exactly what you're doing, innovative, disruptive ideas, And I challenge the entire structure of the emergency management function at the local and state level. That itself, your big screens and your cool vests, that colored vests that everybody wears, in and of itself is a money sink
Mm.
that I can't find an argument that correlates to better post-event outcomes. And that's a lot of money being spent in a lot of things in a limited resource area. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It absolutely has to be a community level response, which is why, again, I'll go back to lauding what you've put in your app about the connectiveness to having local communities have the ability, local governance structures having the ability to provide some information to add to your app. And so the question that I have for you is, do you see an increase in local governments, not just interacting with it, but wishing to be actively involved on the app?
Absolutely. In fact, we're in discussions right now with one, two different cities, a couple of universities, and a couple of counties all across the U.S. As they're trying to prepare their budgets for next year and getting their budgets set up to actually, subscribe and get that ability to one, better empower the community. Which you can do for free. You can always share Hazadapt 100% free. You can even add a Hazadapt link to your alerts 100% free. And that was intentional. We want people to, do those empowerment moments. If they want insight on the resilience of their community, well, then there is a subscription cost to that. But um, we do see that. We do see much more interest. And I think it's right now, Hazadapt is just growing. We're still a very, I wouldn't say very young. We're a younger company, right? We're only about 5 years old. And we have really been focusing all of our money and effort and intelligence on the product. And that's why Hazadapt's amazing. We can definitely put more energy towards our marketing. And we're doing that a lot more this year. And that's been one of the reasons we are seeing so many more downloads and growth. But we do have interested entities. The trick is they're very long sales cycles. And so as a startup, that is tricky to navigate. And we're bootstrapping, right? We don't have these like mega investors behind us. No, we're for the people, by the people right now. And we are bootstrapping. And so I'm thankful we just recently started our service in El Segundo, California. And they have had their local safety information placed on earthquakes, on tsunamis, civil unrest, hazardous materials releases, right? Local hazards that are meaningful for them. And then we help them do outreach in their community. And so that's been a really helpful and beneficial thing for them and their outreach to prepare the community. But then also they also see insight on what works for them, whether that's doing an email outreach or a text outreach, right? They also are able to shape their outreach methods. So we do see interest, but what I've noticed more lately is that we see way more interest in the public. People are nervous. They want reassurance. They want these tools and resources. And when we share Hazadapt, and this is also like mind blowing to me. We have a 45% conversion rate on the App Store, which means of all the people that come to the App Store and see Hazadapt, 45% download Hazadapt. The average app conversion rate is between 2 and 5%. So that tells me that when people see the value, they're typically going to go for it, and that is something like we're very, very proud of. And we know that like all technology, right? Like Facebook, for instance, the government doesn't want to use Facebook, but that's where everybody is. So whether the government wants to use it or not, if we can grow and build that trust and that, use amongst people and the public, the government's going to have to work with us because that's where the people are. And so, for us, we take a lot of pride and effort in one, building trust with the public. That's our responsibility to tell them who we are, how we're here to help, and build that trust. And I don't blame people for having, negative views of tech. I mean, have you met Facebook? But that's really our job, is to build that trust and be that intermediary. There's a saying in the startup world and tech world that big tech is the fourth branch of government here in the US. And it's very true, right? We see how Facebook and X and entities, honestly, are able to do what they want with very little justice and recourse on those actions, right? Facebook has been found to have been promoting a genocide. They've also seen teen deaths based on their algorithms, right? And what type of justice in action is out there? There's not much. And so it's still a wild west. And people, especially with AI coming through, they want to see something they can trust. They want to have, especially with their help resources, they want something that they can trust, especially then. So that's where we really see our value in 100% human made. Absolutely no AI is within Hazadapt. And it's a safe app to use. We are humanity friendly tech. We're the very first humanity friendly tech out there, which means we are inclusive and equitable. We're community centered. We're going to bring people together safely, and we're humane, meaning we're not going to extort your attention. We're not going to prey upon human needs, in order to make money. Right. And that sounds like that should be bare minimum. That's kind of where we're at in tech right now is, one, your tech shouldn't be something that hurts you, and then should be able to offer assistance without creating exclusional barriers. So, for instance, Citizen app, right? It's a vigilante app. I've got a lot of beef with Citizen, but it's only available to those who can pay, right? And so it's something that's it's not really going to be available for everybody, and we need something like that. And that's where we want to be that entity it's for everybody. And no matter who you are, where you are, you can use it. And we're growing to that spot. We know right now we only have 7 languages, but we're getting there.
And as we come to a close on this first, what I hope is many conversations that we get an opportunity to have, and I think trust is number one. Trust is number one. And I study social capital, and trust is the basis of human relationships. And when we build strong, connected relationships where we have norms of reciprocity and we trust our source, the flows of other capital, human capital mainly in this case, which is information education, will flow far better upon trust. And trust is everything. Trust means like you have humans behind your product, and you put the human out there. Here I am. This is who I am. I'm not hiding. We're not a faceless corporation. We're actually real people that you can get in touch with. And an example of what I've done, my email is still jeff@preparednesslabs.ca, and I get everything. And I'll tell you, I get everything. Unapologetically so, I get everything, and I answer them. No matter what the content of the email is, I personally answer every one of them. And for me, the same thing when I have a product to build trust with individuals, this podcast, it's free of charge. It always will be. It's downloaded in 61 countries now. I throw paid advertising behind it to spread the word. But it's free. Like I gain nothing. It actually costs my corporation something like $1,200 a year to run the podcast, to have it up and running, and all the insurance and things that are required behind it, because people do like to sue you every once in a while when they disagree with things you say. But no, and I really love the idea of the fact that you're coming across as, I'm a neutral, trusted agent who uses evidence and science. I'm here to help. And I'm here to give you the information for free. Yes, you're a for-profit corporation that has funding models that allow you to provide that information to free. And I do the same thing. I have a number of paid products. If you're interested, here they are for sale. They're over on my website. If not, guess what? All of my information remains free. And that way you gain trust with the public. Your information is evidence-based. It's confident. It's rational. It's intelligent. And I can't get over the fact that it's creative. I love the idea that you've included the creative piece in it, because we are creative individuals. We're creative beings. We react to that better than, like you said, the laundry list of Facebook bullet points or the PowerPoint bullet points that we see every time you go to a community outreach and they pull up PowerPoint. I'm just putting my hand on my head like this. It's like, you're killing everybody and you haven't even started yet. Like, nobody's going to be interested in any of you. And I tell folks in emergency management that if you want to show up to talk to the public, show up and talk to the public. You can't talk to the public through PowerPoint. Like, the public is not interested in how you're organized, what your theoretical framework is, what your legislative grounding is, what your goals and ambitions are. No, they're not interested in any of that, right? People want to know, I live in an earthquake zone. What do I need to know? And when the bad day happens, what are you going to do? And how are you going to talk to me? If I
Mhm.
need to listen to you and the cell phones are down, what radio station are you going to be? Communicative that builds um, that trusted relationship. So I love the idea that you've grounded it in trust and humanity and real people trying to do something to help other people, which I think is often lost because you're not the only one in the tech space. And I know of one or two other companies um, that are using AI and leveraging AI in the automated space, in the tech space, in emergency management to do a lot of things. And I don't really think we have a good handle on the potential future impacts of not differentiating AI content from other content. And I think that's a dangerous thing. So as we close out here, just one last question for you before we close out this episode. Where do you see Hazadapt in a year from now? If we were to come back a year from now and ask you, where do you see on your vision board your company being in a year?
So in a year, you will see Hazadapt being used in every state of the U.S. Right now, we are only 4 states shy of that. But not just in every state. You're going to see local entities, both private and public, sharing Hazadapt with their community, whether that's their employees or their local jurisdictions. You're going to see more entities sharing Hazadapt, and that can look like sharing that in their email outreaches. You can see that also in their presentations, right? We've got QR codes. And you're going to see Hazadapt being a much more common household name. We are really ramping up our engagement and our outreach, and we're already starting to see quite a few more people and just come to Hazadapt and excited about using it. Um, but in a year, there's a lot of variables that could be impactful for us. Number one, the election, right? And how polarization continues to shape, how we address hazards, how we respond to hazards. And so Hazardep is going to be staying one at the cutting edge, watching, adapting, and making sure that no matter where we go as a country, we at Hazardep are adapting to meet those needs. That's our number one. But number two is we're going to continue to be an advocate for the people and for your safety. So you're going to see Hazardep on many more stages, talking to bigger, and big tech names and to the government saying, hey, we advocate for safety in our technology, in not just in emergency authorities and in emergency management, but across the spectrum of safety technologies and technologies in general. So we really want to be at that forefront of, speaking about this, talking about this, and then people being able to share this with their loved ones. And so we really want to continue to encourage this culture shift of resilience. And I know, preppers and preparedness, that's the terms we've always used. And I think a lot of people are still kind of understanding what that tastes like. But if we can help shape this idea that resilience is hot, knowing that, I know what to do in a disaster, there's confidence that comes with that. There's anxiety relief that knows, hey, you know what? I've got stuff set up. And if something happens, I can think on my feet. I can act. I've got tools and connections and resources, right? That resilience, we want to really boost that. And so I think in a year, we're going to see more of a culture shift and much more of an awareness shift, because disasters are going to continue to get more intense and worse, and we're going to see seasons change. So we're going to continue to see people utilizing Hazadapt in ways that, one, we would not have been able to anticipate 5 years ago, right? Because of how people are interacting with tech, but also how disasters are impacting us. And so we're going to continue to see these trends. We're going to continue to report on them, and we're going to continue to serve people. And I hope within a year, we're going to start, being able to start talking about Hazadapt Canada, Hazadapt Mexico, and continue to grow. But for right now, we're going to be US based, and we're going to continue to serve all over the world with our web app as well.
That is fantastic, and I'll be honest saying I hope that in the not too distant future there's Hazardap available on the Canadian version of the web store, and that I can download it and my local governments become engaged. Listen, Ginny, it was fabulous. Thank you very much for the conversation, and take care. We will talk again soon.
Absolutely, Jeff. We'll be back and talking again soon. Thank you so much.
All right. And that was our incredible opportunity to talk with Ginny Katz from Hazadapt. Go over to their website at hazadapt.com. There's incredible stuff over there. We are definitely going to ask to have Ginny back, and maybe even on a future preparedness technology panel with some other inventive, incredible people that are out there in this space and making a difference for all of us. So thanks again for spending your time with us today. We look forward to many future conversations in this area as we realize that we can leverage technology to improve our preparedness condition. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Take your care and have yourself a great day.